What if the power, prestige, and privilege of ruling families came with a hidden curse? Imagine being born into a dynasty where your bloodline does not simply grant you crowns and palaces but also carries an invisible predator, a disease written into your very DNA. For centuries, the royal families of Europe were admired, envied, and even worshipped as chosen by God. Yet beneath the golden crowns and velvet robes, many monarchs shared something darker, something that would weaken their bodies, twist their fates, and sometimes lead entire kingdoms into chaos. This is not just history. It is a chilling reminder that even those who seemed untouchable were bound by flesh, by biology, and by the cruel lottery of inherited disease. Behind closed doors, rulers who appeared powerful in public were often racked with pain in private. These hidden illnesses shaped decisions of war and peace, altered successions, and even toppled empires. Today, we will step into the shadows of the royal courts, peel back the layers of legend, and expose the deadly diseases that spread through royal bloodlines. And what you'll discover may change the way you see history and human fragility forever. If the early spread of hemophilia revealed cracks in the foundation of royal families, the next chapter in this story plunges us into even darker and more disturbing territory. Here disease is not just a hidden flaw, it is a torment that warped bodies, destroyed minds, and left empires trembling at the feet of fragile monarchs. The madness of kings' few royal afflictions are as infamous as porphyria, a rare metabolic disorder that can cause abdominal pain, muscle weakness, hallucinations, and episodes of madness. Today, scientists believe that this condition plagued the British royal family, particularly King George III, remembered in history as the monarch who lost America. During his reign, George III suffered violent fits of delirium, convulsions, and incoherent rants. Witnesses described him as talking for hours without pause, foaming at the mouth, or clutching his stomach in agony. For the political elite of the time, it was not just disturbing, it was terrifying. How could a nation thrive when its leader was so clearly unwell? His supposed madness became the subject of ridicule across Europe, earning him the cruel nickname the Mad King. Yet beneath the gossip and caricatures lay a real disease, possibly inherited, that eroded both his reign and Britain's reputation. The world saw a powerful empire, but behind palace doors, a king was being consumed by an invisible predator. Spain's tragic monarch. If Britain had its mad king, Spain had its crippled king. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg monarch, known to his subjects as El Hechizado or the Bewitched, Charles was the ultimate symbol of what generations of royal inbreeding could do to a human body. Charles was born with severe physical deformities, an oversized jaw, a protruding tongue that made speech nearly impossible, and frail limbs. He was unable to walk properly until late childhood, often suffered from seizures, and was considered mentally delayed. Courtiers whispered that he was cursed, touched by witchcraft, or even less than human, but Charles's condition wasn't magic, it was science. Centuries of intermarriage within the Habsburg dynasty had tightened the family's gene pool, until it produced a king who was in essence a genetic victim of his own bloodline. His infertility meant that he left no heir, and with his death in 1700, the Spanish Habsburg line collapsed, plunging Europe into the War of Spanish Succession. Here, disease didn't just destroy a man, it reshaped the map of Europe. The fragility of royal children. Another haunting aspect of these hereditary diseases was the devastating mortality rate among royal children. While royal families lived in castles, dined on banquets, and wore jewels worth fortunes, their children were often fragile, weak, and short-lived. Hemophilia, in particular, turned childhood into a battlefield. Young princes were not allowed to climb trees, run freely, or play as common children did. A single bruise could be fatal. Parents watched with dread every stumble, every fall. Some young heirs bled internally from the simplest injuries. Spending their short lives in pain, these children were treated like porcelain dolls, objects of both love and constant fear. The image of golden-haired princes and princesses in portraits, dressed in satin and lace, hides the truth that many were already marked by illness, their futures darkened before they even learned to read or write. Disease as a political weapon. Beyond the personal tragedies, disease also became a tool of politics. Rivals used whispers of madness, weakness, or deformity as weapons in the ruthless battle for power. Rumors of King George III's instability were spread to undermine the monarchy. Stories of Charles's deformities were exaggerated to cast him as cursed by God. In societies where rulers were seen as divinely chosen, illness was more than a medical issue, it was a crack in the very ideology of monarchy. If kings could be crippled, insane, or infertile, did they truly hold divine favor? Could they still command absolute loyalty? Disease, in this way, didn't just weaken rulers, it weakened the very foundations of royal authority. Fascination and horror. Even today, the stories of these afflicted monarchs stir both fascination and discomfort. There is something profoundly unsettling about seeing the world's most powerful people brought low by frailty. Their wealth, palaces, and armies could not shield them from the betrayals hidden in their DNA. This mixture of awe and dread is what keeps these stories alive. They remind us that beneath the crowns and titles, royals were not gods, but human beings vulnerable, fragile, and haunted by the same forces that can afflict anyone. Only in their case, the consequences of disease echoed far beyond the personal, shaping wars, revolutions, and the destiny of nations. Up to this point, we have seen how diseases silently undermined royal families, crippling kings, killing children, and reshaping politics. But now, we arrive at the most haunting and shocking chapter of this story. The moment when a hereditary disease did not just weaken a monarchy, but helped bring an empire crashing down in blood and revolution. The Romanov curse. No story captures the devastating power of royal disease more than that of the Romanovs, the last imperial family of Russia. Their dynasty, which had ruled for more than 300 years, came to a catastrophic end in 1918. At the center of this tragedy stood one fragile boy, Tsarevich Alexei Nikolaevich, the only son of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra. Alexei was born in 1904, and with his birth came immense hope. Russia was desperate for a male heir to secure the dynasty, but soon, whispers began to spread. The boy was sickly. Behind closed doors, the truth was worse than anyone feared. Alexei had inherited hemophilia from his mother, Alexandra, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. For a child, hemophilia was a death sentence. A bruise could swell into agony, a minor cut could bleed for days, and internal bleeding could cripple him. His parents watched helplessly as their son endured excruciating episodes, his tiny body racked with pain. He was wrapped in layers of protection, kept from running, climbing, even playing as other boys did. Every stumble felt like a brush with death. Rasputin's shadow. The desperate Tsarina turned to an unlikely savior, Grigory Rasputin, a wandering mystic who seemed to hold uncanny healing powers. Whenever Alexei suffered a near-fatal episode, Rasputin would appear, praying and whispering over the boy. Miraculously, Alexei's bleeding often subsided afterward. To Alexandra, Rasputin was nothing short of a miracle worker. To the Russian nobility, however, his influence was scandalous and dangerous. How could the future of the empire rest in the hands of a mysterious peasant holy man? Rumors spread that Rasputin controlled the royal family, that he seduced noblewomen, and that he wielded power in state affairs. The truth hardly mattered. Perception was enough. The image of a weak heir, a desperate empress, and a mystical charlatan pulling the strings of government shattered public trust in the monarchy. At a time when Russia was already reeling from war, famine, and social unrest, the weakness of the Romanov heir became a national crisis. Disease as catalyst for revolution. Historians often debate how much Alexei's illness truly influenced the Russian Revolution, but many agree on this. Without his hemophilia, Rasputin might never have gained such influence. Without Rasputin, the monarchy might not have been seen as corrupt, desperate, and out of touch. The Romanovs' downfall was not solely caused by disease, of course, but Alexei's fragile body became a symbol of a fragile dynasty and empire too weak to survive the storms of history. In July 1918, Nicholas II, Alexandra, and their children were executed by Bolshevik revolutionaries in a dark basement. The boy whose blood could not clot was gunned down alongside his family, and with him, the last of the Russian czars. The horror of fragile bloodlines. What makes this story so chilling is not only the brutality of its ending, but the cruel irony that disease played a hidden hand in the collapse of one of the world's greatest empires. A single genetic mutation, passed down through Queen Victoria, rippled outward across Europe, reshaping history in ways no general, diplomat, or monarch could have foreseen. When we look back at the Romanovs, it is impossible not to feel a mixture of pity and horror. The golden palaces, the jeweled crowns, the lavish banquet hall of it meant nothing in the face of a silent, microscopic flaw in the blood of a child. This is the climax of our story, the moment where biology toppled royalty, where human fragility intersected with political destiny, and where a boy's suffering became the fault line along which an empire shattered. When we first hear the phrase deadly diseases that spread through royal bloodlines, it may sound like a dark curiosity and odd detail from history, almost like a tragic footnote. But now we see the truth. These illnesses were not small details. They were hidden forces that shaped the destinies of nations. Hemophilia, porphyria, the twisted legacy of Habsburg inbreeding. These were not only personal tragedies, they altered politics, inspired revolutions, and changed the map of Europe. The sicknesses carried by monarchs were not confined to palaces. They spilled into battlefields, treaties, and the daily lives of millions of subjects. And yet, perhaps the most haunting lesson is how powerless these rulers truly were. The same kings and queens who commanded armies, who ruled by divine right, who were worshipped and feared as chosen by God, could not conquer the invisible flaws written in their blood. Their crowns could not shield them. Their armies could not protect them. Their wealth could not buy them freedom from hereditary suffering. These stories also force us to reflect on the dangerous pursuit of purity and power through intermarriage. In their desire to keep bloodlines noble and alliances strong, royal families trapped themselves in genetic prisons. They built dynasties of marble and gold, but beneath those grand structures lay fragile foundations, waiting to crack. Even today, the echoes remain. Modern genetics has unraveled many of these mysteries, giving us the ability to identify, treat, or even prevent such diseases. But the cautionary tale stands. No matter how high humanity climbs, whether in power, wealth, or knowledge, we remain bound by biology, by the fragility of the human body. Perhaps that is why these stories continue to fascinate us. They strip away the illusion of invincibility. They remind us that behind the portraits, behind the ceremonies, behind the myths of divine right, monarchs were as human as anyone else, vulnerable to pain, to madness, to weakness, to death. And maybe, in a strange way, that makes history more human. The fall of kings, the collapse of empires, the rise of revolutions, all of it was shaped not just by ambition and greed, but by something as small and invisible as a gene, a clotting factor, a twist of DNA. So the next time we marvel at the grandeur of royal families, or walk through the palaces they left behind, let us remember, beneath the jewels and velvet ran blood that was just as fragile as our own, and sometimes far more cursed. Because history is not only written by the victors, sometimes it is written by disease.